Kia ora and welcome to our next video on the story of Alexander the Great. So last time we were talking about Philip's tomb, which I was fortunate enough to visit a couple of years ago. And as I said, that he was buried under this mound which was created over his tomb. It was discovered in 1974, so it's still fairly recent in the greater scheme of things. And the tomb is still there, and it's actually turned into a museum. So one walks down this passageway into the hill itself, and walking down and confronted by sheer darkness, but spotlit are the tombs. And so there we have, that is actually the tomb of Philip II, where his skeleton was found. And just zeroing in closely on the pediment up here, this is an image of, this is Alexander. He's on horseback and he is hunting possibly a mountain lion here. You can see that his right arm is thrust back, and that is his spear he's about to throw. And this is, I was a bit mesmerized by it actually. I just staring at the face of Alexander that was created when Philip died, when Alexander was the age of 20. Looking at that was quite something, I can assure you. Going further into the museum, and this was the casket here where Philip's bones were interred. And there's Macedonian starburst on here, and here's the diadem, the Macedonian crown, that was a part of obviously the kingly regalia. Was in this casket here that Philip's bones were found. And here's his armor and his shield, so we can actually tell how big he was. He certainly wasn't 6 feet, probably more like sort of 5'8" sort of thing. His armor's here, and his shield, and other priceless artifacts in the background there. This was the royal bed that was a part of the tomb, and along here there were little creations depicting people of Philip's family actually. And zeroing in on the right hand corner here, we can see there's actually Alexander as well, so that's pretty cool. It was quite awesome visiting that museum, as you can imagine. And perhaps equally as importantly, there's my lunch afterwards, typical Greek lunch there. Okay, so we go to the birth of Alexander, which was 20th July 356 BC in the city of Pella in Macedonia. So a belated happy birthday to Alexander from a couple of weeks ago. His father was Philip, as we know, who was the king of Macedon, and Philip was, by all accounts, a ruthless warrior king, but a very practical politician. We've seen that in how he ensured the safety of his kingdom and then extended Macedonian influence. Alexander's mother was Olympia. She was a princess of Epirus, which was a neighboring state to Macedonia, so she wasn't Macedonian. And she was, this is no exaggeration, very eccentric and very intense. She partook in snake handling cults and was very emotive driven, possibly a little bit sadistic, and quite scary. Philip, by all accounts, fell in lust with her. Part of it would have been sort of the danger that seemed to crackle around Olympias like electricity. Alexander was a combination of both his mother and his father in personality and character. He too was a ruthless warrior king and a practical politician, but he was also eccentric and intense, a mix of Philip and Olympias there. So there's many stories around Alexander's birth and his childhood that would mean perhaps he's destined for greatness. Many stories indeed, as those of you in class would have seen in the video. Look, he was born into, it was a semi-barbaric world really, ferociously feudal, ferociously competitive that Alexander was born into, and so many stories. Apparently on the day of his birth, Philip was out campaigning, and he received 3 bits of good news on the same day. 1, that his horse had won at Olympia. 2, that his general Parmenio had defeated a city. And 3, that his son Alexander was born. So there's like this, it's sort of this, I guess, this is coincidence or whatever, but it's like, well, the boy born on this day is destined for greatness. There's a story that Alexander was about 10. Some ambassadors from Persia visited Macedonia, and Alexander, instead of sort of being like a boyish, sort of wide-eyed young kid, he was asking them all about how Persia functioned and how the king was able to rule such a massive empire, particularly interested in roads and how everything was connected. There's a story of Alexander taming the horse Bucephalus, Those of you in the class would have seen it on the movie. Look, I'm not going to show it here, but just go to YouTube, Alexander taming Bucephalus, and you will see that there. All these stories, I don't know, were they true or not? It's hard to tell. Or were they included to foreshadow later achievements, sort of reading history backwards and putting these stories in? Quite possible. Or maybe not. Maybe they are true. I think there's no reason for them not to be true, but we do need to remember that perhaps they have been inserted later. Philip was so chuffed with his victory at Olympias and the Olympic Games, and his newborn son, that he dedicated a building to Olympia, to the city of Olympia, where the Olympic Games were held, appropriately called the Philippion. This building here, as you can see, it's like a rotunda sort of shape, isn't it, really? And inside were statues of Philip, Olympias, and the young Alexander. There, on the site of Olympia, where the Olympic Games are held, this is sort of a model of the site here. The famous running track is up here in the top left-hand corner. But one enters the sacred site here, and the Philippion is that round building just there, just foreshadowing the Temple of Jupiter there. And there are the remains. There's the remains. I've been lucky enough to see that a number of times. The remains of the Philippion are still there in Olympia today. So Alexander's education, he had Leonidas, no relation to the Spartan. He was I think he was an uncle of his mother, I think. Leonidas was responsible for Alexander's physical training, so he was taught how to wrestle, how to fight, and how to run, and how to run horseback, and how to hunt. Aristotle was hired by Philip to tutor Alexander from about the ages of 12 to 14. So we have a good link, don't we, between Socrates, and then we have Plato, and then we have Aristotle, and now we have Alexander. Alexander was devoted to philosophy. He was no academic, but he did love philosophy, and he said that Aristotle was like a father to him, which was probably because for the 2 years that Aristotle was there, Philip was away campaigning. Plutarch has a source for that. Aristotle clearly was very fond of Alexander, and he gave Alexander a personal copy of the Iliad, the great story of the Trojan War, that he had annotated, which Alexander, by all accounts, kept in a casket under his bed on his campaign into Persia, along with the dagger. Aristotle's nephew was named Callisthenes, who was about Alexander's age, and he was an historian. Alexander actually took Callisthenes with him on the campaign into Persia. Unfortunately, things broke down between the two, and as we'll see, the stories will be told, and Alexander had Callisthenes executed, which did obviously a breakdown of relationship between him and Aristotle was the result of that there. But he did have, I guess, the best education going at the time. Hunting was a big part of young Alexander's life, both as he was growing up and when he was on campaign in Persia. The whole thing in Macedonia was he had to kill a boar without nets, which meant you were actually a man, and you could actually recline on a couch at dinner time rather than sitting up in a chair. You had to do that to be a man, and by all accounts, Alexander did that. Hunting appears in much of Macedonian art, and in Persia, Alexander would always take time out to go hunting. That was his recreation. Look, it's might make people a little bit queasy, but we've got to do this. Alexander's sex life is really important to understanding who he was as a man. Look, essentially, Alexander loved both women and men. There's great speculation about Alexander was talking about that he's seen as a family man to a gay icon. The key woman in his life was his mother, was Olympias. The movie, unfortunately, hints that there was some sort of sexual relationship between the two, but that's highly unlikely. If just impossible to think about, really. But the movie does hint at that, although they were extraordinarily close. It was 23 before he had sex with a woman, actually, and she bore him a son. And as he goes through the campaign in Persia, we see him form strong relationships with older women, which is quite interesting as well, sort of a mother fixation, perhaps. He did have one child to his mistress, and two to his wife Roxana. One baby died soon after childbirth, but the son that he had was born after Alexander's death, so obviously outlived him. He did obviously love women. And with men as well, this is where he had his deepest emotional ties. And that's not unusual for the time. Like, it's a really male society. Women really, their only job as men sort of was to bear children. Men spent most of the time with men. You did have a very homoerotic society. Um, Alexander's closest friend was Hephaestion, and more than likely was his lover as well. He was his alter ego. Alexander would refer to him as another Alexander. And Alexander said that Hephaestion loves him for who he is, not because he is king. Alexander liked to portray a connection between himself being Achilles and Hephaestion being Patroclus. Patroclus was Achilles' lover, and Hephaestion is also Alexander's lover. The grief that Alexander displayed at his death pretty much puts it certainty that they were lovers. Excessive grief, as we'll see as we move on. And the thing with Alexander is he wasn't really a sexual man. I think that's fair to say. He had many opportunities to indulge in sexual excess, but he did not. When gorgeous-looking slaves were offered to him, he grew angry and grew furious and berated the people who offered them to him. And he did say that sex only reminds him of his mortality. So he wasn't a sexual man. And if you want, people delve into this further. Alexander didn't get his thrills from sex, really. He probably got them from killing people. So let's go have a look at his appearance and his nature. Well, we have a pretty good understanding of what Alexander looked like from the portrait busts of the day. His hair was like a lion. It was wavy, as you can see there in the statue. His head was tilted a little bit, and his eyes were sort of tilted to the left and looked far away. It's like he's a dreamer with a lion's spirit. He could have had a crick in his neck from maybe a difficult childbirth, but his head did tilt to the left slightly, and his eyes were uplifted slightly and always looked far away. He was short. Now Philip was only 5'2", short but stocky and tough. He was not someone to be messed with, and the average height back then was not much more than 5'2", really, anyway, for Greeks. He had a sort of a reddish complexion, and he would get flushed when angry. He would get very, very angry. His hair was browny blondie. It's peroxide blonde in the movie. Colin Farrell has very black hair, so I suppose they had to do it that way. What was Alexander like? What was his nature? Well, he was an exceptionally tough human being. He was ruthless. He would be merciless when he could be. He was adept at seizing the moment. In many of the battles, he would seize the moment that would lead to victory. A hard drinker, just like his father. And he wasn't actually a happy or pretty drunk. He was often offensive and very arrogant when he was drunk. He's a man of extremes. He was chivalrous and generous. There's also sadistic malevolence. He would set women free, and then he would let his men go and rape. He was quite the man of extremes. He was very energetic. He was prone to sulks when he didn't get his way. He'd go lock himself in his room for days, actually, but always driven by a desire to prove himself. Unbelievably narcissistic, but also perhaps some sort of personality disorder here. Always desire to prove himself to show that he is worthy. So that's Alexander, and that, I guess, covers a bit about him, and that will set us up as we move further on the story. Okay, go keep that.